Sometimes it's the right opponent, other times it is just your night. But for our money, these 10 fighters made the most difficult combat sport on the planet look totally effortless. Here are 10 ridiculously one-sided UFC fights. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Abel Trujillo. To kick things off, what better place to start than with a bout that broke the all-time UFC record for completed takedowns? At the time, it didn't seem as though Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Abel Trujillo was a mismatch. Sure, Khabib was one hell of a prospect, but Abel Trujillo was no pushover. Or at least, that's what we thought. Nurmagomedov showed us exactly why he was considered such a massive talent, taking Trujillo down a record 21 times over the course of the fight's 15 minutes. Things got so bad for Abel that he eventually could do little more than wave his arms in the air in frustration as the eagle lifted him to the canvas. As if to ask those watching what on earth he could actually do to someone that good. Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez. It's one thing putting on a dominant display, but doing it in a super fight against a veteran of Eddie Alvarez's experience? Yeah, this was a special one. Conor McGregor moved up in weight from the 145-pound division to challenge for the lightweight crown. And despite him having stopped off at welterweight twice, it was immediately clear that 155 pounds was his natural division. Conor's accuracy, his timing, his fluidity, his speed, it all proved to be far too much for Eddie to handle. 3 knockdowns came in round 1 before another 2 in the second round, including a deft 4-punch combo that put Alvarez to bed. As dominant as it gets, folks.
Better here in this round, though. Oh, man, until that. Oh, he's done.
John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson II. The first meeting was a back-and-forth classic that made a star of Alexander Gustafsson and set a new standard for thrilling title fights. But the rematch? Not so much. John Jones, by his own admission, had been partying hard before their first showdown, and when his second crack at the Mauler came around, he wanted to make a huge statement. Over the course of the 3 rounds the fight lasted, Jones basically nullified everything Gustafsson tried on the feet before eventually shooting for a takedown in the third. When he got it, he swiftly established a strong postured position and pounded Gus out for an easy TKO to win his old 205-pound belt back. Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou I. Sometimes a fighter just isn't ready for a shot at UFC gold. And though Francis Ngannou was blessed with insane KO power, his first fight with the longtime heavyweight champ Stipe Miocic came too soon. Stipe was able to weather Ngannou's early storm, eventually controlling his opponent with little issue through the final 4 rounds. It was one of those breakout performances that just never came to pass. And in some ways, the UFC and Dana White specifically never did forgive Ngannou for coming up so short. Total dominance for the champ. Francis Ngannou versus Stipe Miocic II. But that wasn't the end of the Francis Ngannou story. No, when the dust settled on his title shot and his truly awful performance against Derrick Lewis was in the past, Ngannou started to pick up steam, tightening up his overall game while retaining the finishing ability that made him a star. 4 straight first-round knockouts were enough to book him another shot, and this time, Francis had both the wrestling ability and the confidence to make a better account of himself. To say that he battered Stipe in there would be an understatement. He stuffed takedowns, scored one of his own, and eventually KO'd him clean to finally earn the title of baddest man on the planet. If you're enjoying this content and want to see more videos like this, drop a comment and subscribe to our channel to never miss out on any of our upcoming videos. Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin. This next one was like something out of a movie. Stepping up in weight to the 205-pound division, Anderson Silva made the former champ Forrest Griffin look like he had no business being in the same octagon as him. Sitting back and allowing Forrest to try and hit him, Griffin swung aimlessly at the Spider's chin. But Anderson was just too fast. He ducked, dodged, and dipped away from every shot before eventually countering Forrest with a light but supremely well-timed punch, shutting his lights off there and then. This was a short fight, but it was almost like Silva was putting Forrest out of his misery. Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa is a pretty powerful dude. But when you come up against someone as technical, as elusive as Israel Adesanya, it can mean absolutely nothing. Borachinha could barely get going in there with the last style bender. Izzy chopped at his front leg repeatedly, stopping all striking attempts from his opponent. Eventually, in the second round, he dropped the Brazilian with a hard shot, finishing the job in a near flawless lesson on how to totally shut down a bigger puncher.
Boom, there's that slide back left hand right off the temple, drops him, and Israel goes in for the kill.
Khamzat Chimaev versus Kevin Holland. This one did not take long, and by Khamzat Chimaev's standards, he didn't really do too much damage with his trademark ground and pound. But after a late notice opponent switch-up threatened to cause Boers a real headache, he still managed to put one of the most dominant performances of his career. Kevin Holland was the opponent chosen to fill the spot that should have been taken by Nate Diaz. But either way, Chimaev had little issue when it came to grabbing a hold of Holland early, mauling him and eventually locking up the fight, ending Dar's choke.
I mean, and constant pressure and squeeze.
TJ Dillashaw versus Renan Barao the first. When MMA springs up a major surprise, it can really come up as a huge shock to the system. And sure enough, just as the former UFC bantamweight champion Renan Barao was looking set to add himself to the pantheon of all-time greats, it steps in the unheralded contender TJ Dillashaw. We knew TJ was good, but Barao was unbeaten in 32 fights, making him the heavy favorite for this matchup. However, Dillashaw had been implementing a new and improved striking system alongside his coach Dwayne "Bang" Ludwig. And before anyone knew what was happening, TJ was totally dominating one of the world's pound-for-pound best. It was a 5-round clinic that was capped off with a stunning TKO sequence by head kick and follow-up punches. Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. And finally, we come to a recent entry, but one that really served as a real coming out performance for Islam Makhachev. Again, it's not like we didn't know that Islam was good, but if there was one thing we were certain of going into UFC 280, it's that Charles Oliveira was the most dangerous fighter in the sport. Well, as it turned out, Makhachev was not fazed, not one bit. He took the Bronx apart from the opening bell, totally fearless in the face of Oliveira's striking and legendary grappling skills. In the second round, he even dropped the Brazilian with a punch, eventually tapping him with a tight hand and arm choke, a dominant display in every sense of the word.